If you're enjoying the Health Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
And we are back to talk more about fat and its secret life, Eleanor.
By Sylvia Tara, Ph.D., The Secret Life of Fat.
And last episode, we really talked about, the history of fat, how we love it, we hate it, what we've been through, like our thought process, and then also how fat is energy. And we can think of it like currency, but there's so much more to it.
Oh, gosh, yes. And that's what's so much fun to find out about. If you don't know this, stay tuned. Fat can talk. Fat can listen. It does all sorts of things. So when we talk about fat talking, I think what Sylvia, is that how you say her name? Mm-hmm. Okay, is saying is it's really part of the endocrine system. It's the hormone signaling because our fat makes estrogen, and who knew?
Who knew? And there's. I
always thought it was. People tell you about. No, estrogen comes from your ovaries.
And we find out in this book that perhaps why postmenopausal women hang on to a little extra fat is because it is making that estrogen and we want it.
Yeah.
So that was really intriguing.
Yeah.
So my question there, though, is because men also have a bit of estrogen, just as same as women. Some have a little bit of testosterone.
And that comes from your adrenal glands.
Right. So,
but if you get fat.
Yeah. So, what you're saying that I don't have to have ovaries to have the
right because your fat will convert those androgens that your body's making, like in your case testosterone, and I make a little testosterone as a female as well from my adrenals. The fat can convert that to estrogen. Okay. So that's what and then when you look at body fat deposition on older men, you begin to see a change in body shape as well.
And so what Sylvia talks about is there's this Goldilocks effect, that too little fat is detrimental and too much fat interrupts their normal processes.
Absolutely. So there's that sweet spot.
Yeah.
It's So what are the signaling molecules? Well, this girl that I told you about earlier, that the girl that had no fat, she, had a good appetite and was eating like crazy. And so her blood serum was loaded with triglycerides and cholesterols, but she was hungry and losing weight. So what's going on with her? And then she got these bumps all over her, subcutaneous bumps. Here's this little, 5-year-old, 6-year-old looking weird and just, not thriving, you would say. And they determined that there was a missing protein. She didn't have a protein. And through a whole rigmarole of discussion and stuff, what we found out was the protein that she was missing is the one called leptin. And leptin was discovered recently, in my lifetime, I believe. So what we're figuring out is if you have a lipodystrophy, which means a problem with your lipid metabolism regulation, one of the ways could be that you don't have a hormone that's signaling you to stop eating. To suppress that appetite and let your body, do what it needs to do. So once they started injecting these daily injections of leptin into this girl, she recovers. She's a college student, going to get married. It has a normalized life because of a missing hormone.
It was a huge discovery.
Yeah. And then they found another one that will increase your appetite, adiponectin. So, we have, these balancing hormones that are regulating appetite because your body wants to maintain a homeostasis. And it needs that bank, right?
Right.
And so if you deplete your reserves, then you need to fill those reserves back up. So you're going to get a signal, say, hey, bring on some more calories. We need to store them.
What is that signal?
What, the appetite?
Yeah.
Adiponectin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Adiponectin was one of my favorites to discover and read about because it is one of the reasons we can be fat and healthy. And
Love it.
Because it signals fat to be taken out of the blood, which is good for our heart health. We don't want that fat circulating. That's the triglycerides, the cholesterol.
Yeah, and then you get the plaque depositions, injury to the endothelial cells.
And it's stored in a healthy way, so more in that subcutaneous fat versus the visceral fat, which we know is more metabolically active and nestled against the organs.
Yeah, and another thing that it has is macrophages, which are immune cells. And the more fat you have, like if you're a lean fat person, you have maybe 10% of your adipose tissue has macrophages in it. If you're heavy, it's more than 50% of your adipose tissue or cells are macrophages. So something changes when you get too much of it, and it puts pressure, and that causes inflammation, that increase in the immune cells. And what we've all said in so many cases, underlying so many of our chronic diseases, is that subclinical inflammation that you don't even know you've got going on.
Exactly.
And that's what this fat can be doing to us.
And that leads to insulin insensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so how, you might be asking, how do you get this adiponectin? Well, I say it differently than you.
Yeah, you probably say it right, because I have this Australian, British, and American, and I'm also guilty of malapropisms. And so you can correct me anytime you need to.
So we learn in this book that your genes can play a role in whether your body is making this, but also exercise can increase adiponectin.
Mm-hmm.
And exercise was really the hero in this book.
Absolutely. Again, yay
exercise. So I thought that was really a neat discovery to read about.
Yeah, and speaking of exercise, you remember the gymnasts that got so thin, and then all of a sudden there were these female runners that were breaking their bones. And when we began to look at the ballerinas with the eating disorders, do you remember these women athletes became something of notice because they were doing these incredible things, but they really weren't healthy. Their bodies were not healthy.
Right, and it was because they had too little fat.
Exactly. And so this woman in 1975, Rose Fresh, was another interesting story in the book. She was looking at sexual maturity and body fat, and up to that point it was weight and height, and age that they were looking at sexual maturity, particularly in females. So this Dr. Frisch got a job as a research assistant. She has his Ph.D., but her husband gets a job at MIT, and in the 70s there was a little bit of a gender gap in the science world between women and men. May still exist, but she was on a research assistant salary. And, he was the one getting the good salary at MIT. She's at Harvard, and she is awarded the Guggenheim Fellowship, which is a really prestigious award. And so when that committee was looking at how much they were going to fund her research, this fellowship, they said, "What's your salary?" And she told them, and it was very low. So they said, "No, not your monthly salary, your annual salary." And they thought her annual salary was can you talk about disparity here? So anyway, they got that corrected. She gets funded properly. And then she goes on to do this work that's not accepted by her peers, because she's saying body fat is important in sexual maturity. And the clinicians and researchers at the time said, "Go back and look at your work. It's wrong." Just discrediting her. And after she persists, people say, "Oh, I believe she was right."
And now
and
her
they're
work
helping
is
people.
Foundational,
Yes.
and we all know that if you have too little fat, you're not going to be able to reproduce, get pregnant.
Yeah.
And all of these runners and ballerinas and such now are putting on extra pounds.
Yeah, so if you have little girls and they do 120% jump in fat just before their menarche starts, you don't tell them to go on a diet. And that's what this woman, author's mother at 12, was telling her she's fat, so she goes on a diet. and disrupts this whole natural maturity process. If you have, it requires 17% body fat to get started in the sexual maturity, and 22% for regular cycles. So, for females, they have a cyclic thing, and it can be irregular, which really disrupts their whole world. I mean, it's so these athletes were, amenarche, were not having menses. Their bones then become fragile because the stem cell in the bones also gives rise to fat cells or bone cells. And so if you don't have enough fat, your body's those stem cells are going to say, make more fat. Don't make bone, make more fat. So your bones get weak. Oh, this is terrible. But how fun to know that there is a connection.
Right. And then your brain even shrinks.
Oh, yes, because your brain is fat. It is phospholipids. It is. Your cells are phospholipids.
Yes,
that's a fat.
The very lining of your
boundary of your cells is made of fat. So if you are below these percentages, your whole anatomy is struggling. Immune system, you don't make enough immune cells, you don't make enough brain cells, you don't keep them healthy, your bone cells are weakened. Even your endothelium of your vascular system gets messed up because there are receptors in there even for this leptin and other things. And leptin kicks into, my favorite, arachidonic acid, but I'm going to stop. Pull me back.
Sounds like a dinosaur.
Yeah. Oh, it's good. That's good stuff right there. But another day.
She does go into the difference between women and men.
Mm-hmm.
And, nature has designed women to have more fat than men. Mm-hmm. And sometimes women hate it, but it's perfectly okay. And there's a reason behind it. Mm-hmm. And there's just some cool things I noted here I want to share with the listeners.
Please do.
You know how you gain the most weight in the third trimester of pregnancy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did not know this, that it doesn't necessarily correlate with increased calorie intake. So they did a study where they put the gut microbes of a woman from her first trimester of pregnancy into mice, and then someone who was in their third trimester into mice. And just from that transfer of gut bacteria, the mice with the third trimester microbes gained more weight.
Yeah.
So even if the calories, it's not that we aren't burning as much calories because we've got another human that we're feeding. It's that our microbes are taking in more calories from the same amount of food that we're eating as before.
And you remember when we read The Healthy Gut, Healthy You, he was talking about eat to feed your microbiome.
Yes.
And that's this pregnant lady's story, right? You're feeding them. And do you have a diverse microbiome, or are you very limited? The more diverse it is, the better it is for you.
Correct. And she does go into prebiotics just a little bit.
Yeah.
And how important fiber is.
Yeah, which is one of the foods for those things.
Correct. So another thing is she talks about how our fat affects our menstrual cycle. Mm-hmm. This, in particular, in the second phase of the menstrual cycle, your estrogen is decreasing, and you might see cravings. Mm-hmm. And then progesterone is increasing, which causes you to store fat. Mm-hmm. So, and then this one was a big kicker that I think everybody should know. That according to these studies, women compensate better for burned calories after exercise, especially any caloric activity that burns above 400 calories.
You mean you're going to eat right after you exercise?
Yeah, so women they have more of an urge to replace those calories and probably then more after a very intense workout. So you're not getting as much return for your buck that you think you are if you're doing those extreme workouts. And then, women's bodies are just, they want to recover.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people say, I exercise and exercise and exercise, and I'm not getting where I'm going.
Yeah.
You need to explore, what are you doing after the exercise too,
Yes, and Sylvia, I was looking into her stuff online, and she really recommends if you're trying to shed some weight that you want to get your food intake and your willpower and all that under control before you add the exercise, because of that extra urge that it's...
Yeah, we did read a book on the willpower instinct, correct?
Did,
we might need to review that now.
She did have a chapter on that.
Mm-hmm. Anything else about women?
And then just, how in menopause, we do have that decrease in estrogen, which causes fat to be stored around the stomach. And postmenopausal women carry 49% more of that intra-abdominal fat than pre-menopausal women. And I hear that all the time from clients, and it's just science.
And it's maybe okay. Why do we make it bad? Why do we tell them that's bad? If it's normal and natural, maybe we should say, hey, I'm healthy.
That's right.
This is good. And change that paradigm shift to, no, I have to look like a 20-year-old that's, anorexic.
Right.
It's like why are we doing that? This, where we make normal stuff a disease. And we've talked about this before. Yeah. It's like we're off track there. When we talk about men, though, if they have too little fat, they can have a loss of libido and prostate fluid, which then affects the fertility, the mobility of the sperm and that sort of thing. So if they have too little fat, they're going to not have enough leptin, and the leptin is the signaler, and they're going to have a low testosterone, which will then mean body hair, masculine voice, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So you need to plump up a little bit. Like the Jewish mom says, eat your food, you're looking skinny. Have another helping.
Yeah, she does mention that, I think it's later in life that, 10 extra pounds is actually protective against mortality.
Yes, that was nice to hear. I'm feeling really good about that. It's like, yes. And the idea that, I think she used Kathy as an example in that one. Kathy was a skinny 20-year-old, then went into the workforce, had a sedentary job, high stress, and we get into that stress response, and the cortisol, that messes so much of this regulation up. Lived that way for 20, 30 years, and then at 65, she's 100 pounds overweight and not sure what to do about it. And that is how the author gets us to that conversation about older women being a little heavier, not 100 pounds, that's too much, but getting into the balance there of why do we thicken up? There's a natural reason for it. And one of the benefits is you have stronger bones.
Right.
And so that fear of osteopenia and osteoporosis, maybe because you're too thin, let's bulk up a little bit. Could be okay.
Yeah, I love that, this gives us a different lens to view fat through, and the normal, natural ways that it works in our body. And we don't have to hate it. It can be stubborn. It can be hard to get rid of.
Yeah. Well, she does have a how you do it and then how she did it part of her book. She gives the first part of the book is, let's just talk about fat and let's use these examples of, genetics and viral infections, which I thought was really an interesting story, that viruses can affect our fat, and the hormonal story. But when she talks about what do we do with all this information, what do we do? And you just said exercise, right? Is at the top of her list? Yeah,
absolutely.
So
she, I think, recommends 45 minutes most couple times a week.
And what I would say at 360health4u.com, where we're making healthy happen, one of the best things you can do is commit to a healthy lifestyle. It is not just what we're eating, it's the lifestyle we're living that is going to affect our health, and particularly this fat body. But regular exercise to include your strength, and then 7 hours of sleep. Have we read a book on why we sleep?
We have.
And I'm convinced that's a good thing. And if you don't get your 7 hours of sleep, your leptin cycles are going to be off. Hydration. We need to hydrate. Low-calorie fibers are something that we need in our bodies for that microbiome. Reduce stress and laugh a lot. So that's why we come to this podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And she does mention the National Weight Control Registry, which I've studied and referenced quite a bit in my career.
Yep.
And I appreciate that mention. A lot of those participants in that registry have lost weight and kept it off, and they report what they do to keep it off. Most of them are exercising. Most of them are monitoring either their food intake or their weight or some form of just keeping up with what their behaviors are. Mm-hmm. And that is something that we do help our clients with at Well Balanced Nutrition. Visit us at wellbalancednutrition.com if you're interested in a free clarity call to learn more about our one-on-one coaching. And we can get you on board with a healthy, happy diet that's good for your gut and good for your body.
Yeah, and I think involving professionals at some level is a really healthy thing to do. As we wrap this up, I'd like to just read a little quote here from the end of her book where she says, so, are we doomed to obesity and metabolic disease as we age? Not entirely. There are measures we can take to manage our fat. We need to exercise, eat wisely, sleep enough if we are to gain some control over our weight. But even with that, managing fat will require more effort and discipline in middle age than ever before in our lives. So call Kristen. Fortunately for most of us, with age also comes wisdom and perspective, including the realization that a little extra fat here and there isn't such a big deal after all. The important thing is to be healthy, and if you're up for the challenge, you can keep your fat in line. So it's very hopeful.
Yes, perfect way to end that.
Yeah, so
I hope you guys learned a little bit about fat and can appreciate it.
And go read this book because it is a good book to have in your library. Signing out, Eleanor.
See you next time.
Views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.